They say a single act of kindness cannot change a town. They say ordinary people remain invisible forever. But on this night, inside a small diner in Ridgefield, Kentucky, a waitress was fired for feeding a homeless veteran, and exactly 24 hours later, 200 soldiers in full military uniform would surround that same diner because of what she did. The plate hit the floor with a violent crash, scattering hot food across the tiles. The sound cut through the diner like a slap. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. And at the center of it all stood Clara James, a 32-year-old waitress who had never once raised her voice at anyone. Across from her trembled an old man in a torn military coat. He flinched at the sound of the plate hitting the ground, his hands instinctively rising as if expecting another blow. Behind him, Wayne Becker, the owner of Billy's Diner, jabbed a thick finger toward the door and spat the words loud enough for everyone to hear. "I told you we do not serve beggars here. No metaphor, no hesitation. Just raw humiliation thrown into the air for the entire room to absorb." Clara did not step back. She stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Wayne and the veteran. Her apron was damp, her hands still holding a towel, but her posture was steady. She shielded the man without thinking. The movement so natural it seemed like instinct rather than courage. "He only asked for hot water," Clara said, voice calm, controlled. "I gave him food that was going to be thrown away. You will not give away anything in my diner," Wayne barked. "Not food, not service, not time, nothing. You made me look weak." Customers looked everywhere except at Clara. At the ceiling, the floor, their plates, their untouched coffee cups. Anything to avoid being the person who might have to say something decent. Clara reached into her pocket. Her fingers shook slightly, but she held her ground. "You can take the coffee out of my tips," she said. "I will pay for it." Wayne slammed his hand down on the counter. The impact echoed like a gunshot. Even the neon sign outside seemed to flicker in reaction. "That is not the point," he roared. "You do not get to make decisions in my business. You do not get to play hero, and you do not get to serve trash out of my kitchen." The old man winced, shrinking into himself. Clara stood taller. "He is a veteran," she said quietly. "I do not care if he is President of the United States," Wayne snapped. "You are done here." Silence. Heavy. Choking. Immediate. Clara stared at him, not in disbelief, but in resignation. She knew this moment had been building for a long time, every time she covered for someone, every time she worked extra hours, every time she refused to be hardened by a place that had grown cold. Wayne jabbed at the door again. "You are fired. Right now. Pack your things and get out of my diner." The elderly couple in the corner stiffened. A teenager by the window froze with his phone halfway out of his pocket. The cook peeked through the kitchen window, then disappeared, as if afraid of being pulled in. Not a single person spoke. Clara took off her apron, folded it once, and placed it on the counter. Her breath trembled, but her face did not. She gave the veteran a small reassuring nod, as if she were the one trying to comfort him rather than the other way around. Then she walked out into the rain. The cold hit her instantly. Her canvas shoes soaked through in seconds. Water dripped from her hair into her eyes, but she did not stop. Behind her, the neon sign buzzed faintly. No one followed. No one called her name. The world remained exactly as indifferent as it had been 1 minute earlier. But just as she reached the edge of the awning, she heard a shuffling sound from the alley. The veteran, thin, limping, soaked to the bone, stepped toward her. He clutched something in his hand, his breath uneven. When he reached her, he placed the object into her palm with surprising firmness. A dog tag, old, scratched. The name almost worn away. "You paid a price for me," he whispered. "You should not have. But tonight you reminded me. I am still a person." He tapped the dog tag. "If I do not make it through this winter, someone should know I was here." Clara's throat tightened. Before she could answer, he turned and disappeared back into the storm, swallowed by darkness and exhaustion. Minutes later, Clara made her way home, her bag clutched to her chest, the dog tag warm against her skin. Inside her small rented room, she sat on the edge of the bed, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Smokey, her one-eyed tabby, crawled into her lap, unaware that her life had just been set on fire. Her savings were already low, rent was due soon, her shifts were gone, her reputation in town was fragile. And yet the only thing she could think about was the old man's voice. "You reminded me. I am still a person." She held the dog tag tighter. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a different kind of storm was forming, one that would break at sunrise. Because while Clara tried to figure out what to do next, while she sat alone in that tiny room with rain pounding on the window, something was already moving in the darkness of Ridgefield. Engines rumbling. Orders being given. vehicles heading toward Billy's diner, and at 6:45 the next morning, the entire town would wake to see 200 soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in front of Wayne Becker's door, and they would not be there to order breakfast. Clara James had never been the kind of woman anyone noticed. Not because she lacked presence, but because life in Ridgefield, Kentucky taught people like her to survive by staying small. The town had been sinking for years, ever since the old manufacturing plant shut down and left hundreds jobless, turning every street into a reminder of what used to be. People worked longer hours for less pay. Landlords raised rents while wages stayed frozen, and everyone learned to mind their own business to avoid becoming the next target of someone's frustration. In a place like that, silence was not just a habit, it was a shield. Clara's routine was simple but demanding: open the diner before sunrise, close it long after the last customer shuffled out, and squeeze the rest of her life into the slim hours in between. She worked double shifts without complaint because complaining did not keep the lights on, and because the bills kept coming whether she was tired or not. The tips were small, often just coins left behind without eye contact, yet she treated every cent like a victory. Behind every shift, behind every forced smile, was the knowledge that she had to keep moving or everything she held together would collapse. Her home was a rented room above an auto garage, a space so small she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms. After her roommate vanished without notice, leaving unpaid bills behind, Clara had packed what little she owned into a single suitcase and walked across town in the rain, trying not to feel humiliated. Smokey, her one-eyed tabby, had curled into a drawer lined with a towel, claiming it as his personal bunker without complaint. The faucet screamed whenever she turned it on. An electrical outlet sparked if she breathed too close, and her entire savings, $64.38, sat in her phone banking app, decreasing every time she bought even a loaf of bread. But none of that stopped her from getting up at 5 o'clock every morning, tying her hair back, slipping on her brown apron, and walking to Billy's diner rain or shine. She kept her head down, served customers with steady hands, and made sure every table was clean no matter how rude or careless the guests were. While the town saw her as the quiet girl behind the counter, what they really meant was that she never asked for anything, never demanded fairness, and never pushed back when life pushed her. They did not know she noticed everything: the loneliness in regulars' eyes, the dishwasher's unexplained bruises, the people who slid into booths to escape the cold and asked only for water because they could not afford anything else. At night, Clara often held her grandfather's dog tags while Smokey lay across her lap, reminding herself that endurance was not weakness. Henry James, the man who had raised her after her parents disappeared into their own chaos, had taught her that honor was quiet, not grand or loud. He had shown her what it meant to stand tall even when you felt small, and those words had become the backbone of her life long after he passed away. Every time she whispered, "We are still okay," she was really trying to convince herself that she could keep going, that she was not as close to breaking as she felt. What Clara did not know was that her life was already woven into something much larger than her tired routine, her tiny room, or the silence she wrapped herself in each day. Every unnoticed act of kindness she performed had left a mark, invisible but lasting, on people who had come and gone through Ridgefield. And as the town slept on that stormy night, her decision to stand in front of an old man's shame was already setting events in motion far beyond anything she imagined. Because the world she lived in, a world where people kept their heads down and kindness was rare, was about to collide with a world where loyalty never dies and silence can turn into an army overnight. And by the time the sun rose again, Clara would discover just how powerful a single quiet act could become when the right people finally paid attention. Clara's strength did not come from books or speeches. It came from a man with a crooked back, a weathered face, and a heart that never stopped believing in her. Henry James had been her entire world after her parents drifted out of her life, leaving behind more questions than explanations. He stepped in without hesitation, raising her in a small apartment filled with the scent of pipe tobacco, worn boots, and stories he only shared when he thought she needed them. And though he had survived the Korean War, the truth was he carried battles inside him long after the uniform came off. Henry taught her discipline by example, waking before the sun even in his old age, sweeping the porch, fixing things that were not broken, and insisting that a person's character was measured when no one was watching. He taught her dignity not as a lesson, but as a lifestyle, saying please, even when frustrated, helping neighbors without waiting for thanks, and carrying himself with quiet pride in a world that had forgotten people like him. Most of all, he taught her honor through simple acts, holding the door for strangers, giving up his seat on buses, and keeping promises even when they cost him more than he admitted. "Honor is not loud, Clara," he used to say. "It is quiet, like cleaning the porch before guests come, even if they never come." Clara grew up trying to imitate that quiet strength, following him like a shadow during her childhood. She learned how to cook simple meals, how to fold laundry just the way he liked it, and how to listen more than she spoke. When other kids talked about video games or vacations, Clara talked about helping her grandfather polish his old medals, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and a few citations so faded they were almost blank. Henry would tap one gently and say, "These do not make me special. What you do when no one is clapping, that is what matters." When he passed away 3 years ago, Clara had felt the world tilt under her feet. She stayed silent at his funeral not because she was cold, but because she refused to let grief break the last piece of discipline he had given her. People whispered that the quiet girl was heartless, not realizing that she was using every bit of strength he had taught her simply to stand upright. After she returned home that night, she placed his dog tags under her pillow and did not cry, choosing instead to whisper, "I will stand tall. I promise." That promise shaped every decision afterward. She worked extra shifts because he taught her never to depend on others. She swallowed insults from customers because he taught her that reacting in anger only gave away her power. She lived modestly because he had raised her to value stability over comfort. All the while, she kept the shoebox of his medals under her bed, like a silent guardian, opening it on nights when the loneliness pressed too hard against her ribs. Henry's lessons were simple, but they were the armor she wore, everyday armor, that no one in Ridgefield ever noticed, but that kept her moving, even when life tried to knock her down. And though Clara believed she had buried her grief, the truth was she had simply turned it into motivation, using his memory as a compass for every hard moment she faced. She did not realize that her quiet way of living, her refusal to let the world harden her, and her instinct to protect those who could not protect themselves were all echoes of him. She believed she had become invisible. She believed her life was small, but Henry James had raised her for something bigger, something she could not yet see. And soon, the world would understand that what he taught her, the honor he lived by, and the courage she carried were not just the traits of a quiet waitress. They were the traits of someone about to change the fate of an entire town. Clara's life began to unravel faster than she could patch it together, starting with the day her roommate lost her job and vanished without warning, leaving behind an overdue utility bill and half a lease that Clara could not possibly afford alone. She had come home from a double shift to find the bedroom empty, the closet bare, and a note taped to the fridge that simply said, "I am sorry." No explanation, no forwarding address, just a vanished presence and a pile of consequences that landed squarely on Clara's shoulders. By the end of that week, the landlord gave her two choices: pay the full amount or leave immediately. With only $64.38 in her bank account, she packed her belongings into one suitcase and a cardboard box, carried Smokey in her arms, and dragged everything through the cold night toward the only space she could afford, a rented room above an auto garage. The room smelled of oil and metal, the walls were thin enough for her to hear every wrench drop below, and the single outlet sparked each time she plugged in her phone charger. Smokey explored the tiny space, then curled himself into an empty drawer lined with a towel, as if accepting their new home without judgment. Clara sat on the edge of the bed that first night, staring at the peeling paint, telling herself she could adapt, that she had survived worse. The next morning, she woke at 5 o'clock, just as she always had, washed up in a sink that screamed loudly every time the faucet turned, and walked to Billy's diner through steady rain. She told no one about the move, told no one about the roommate who disappeared, told no one about the landlord's threats or her savings draining like water through a cracked bucket. Her co-workers barely greeted her, customers barely glanced at her, and Wayne Becker only barked orders without a single acknowledgement that she had opened the diner early again. Through every shift, she acted as if nothing had changed, even though everything around her had begun to crumble. Clara knew she was balancing on the edge of collapse, but she kept her head down, convinced that as long as she continued showing up, continued working, continued pushing, she could stay afloat. What she did not realize was that losing her apartment, her financial stability, and her sense of home was not the beginning of her downfall, but the final push that would lead her straight into the moment that changed everything. The moment where kindness collided with cruelty, where her quiet strength met the worst of humanity, and where she unknowingly stepped into a story far larger than the small life she thought she was living. People in Ridgefield often described Clara as the quiet girl, but what they really meant was that she never asked for anything, never complained, and never challenged the way things were, no matter how unfair. Customers spilled coffee on her shoes without apologizing. The cook snapped orders through the kitchen window as if she were a machine, and Wayne Becker deducted hours from her paycheck whenever he felt like tightening expenses. Clara endured it all in silence. Not because she lacked pride, but because she had learned long ago that raising her voice in a town built on struggle only made you a target. So she swallowed every slight, every disrespect, every unpaid hour, telling herself survival mattered more than fairness. Yet, while others dismissed her as invisible, Clara saw everything around her with unsettling clarity. She noticed the regulars who lingered at their tables because they had no one waiting at home, the new dishwasher who came to work with fresh bruises he tried to hide behind his sleeves, and the older women who ordered only coffee because they were choosing between caffeine and groceries. She knew which customers were hurting, which were lonely, and which were trying desperately not to be seen. Clara carried all of this quietly, never speaking it aloud, but feeling it in every shift as if she were absorbing the weight of the town through every plate she carried. Late at night, after long shifts that left her feet burning, she would sit on her small bed with Smokey curled in her lap and her grandfather's dog tags in her hand, whispering the same words she used to whisper when she was a child. "We are okay. We are still okay." She said it not because it was true, but because saying it out loud made her feel like she was still in control of something, even if that control was fading. The truth was that Clara was exhausted in a way that went deeper than her bones. She was tired in her spirit, tired of pretending she was fine while the world chipped away at her one small injustice at a time. What Clara could not see was that all those unnoticed acts of kindness, the ones she never thought twice about, had begun forming a quiet trail behind her, like footprints leading somewhere she had never intended to go. She believed she was just surviving, just enduring, just trying to get through one more day. But life had been watching her far more closely than she ever realized, and the consequences of her quiet goodness were already gathering beyond her awareness. And soon, that trail of silent kindness would lead her directly into the moment where everything changed. The rain was beating hard against the windows when the diner door creaked open and every head lifted for half a second before looking away again, pretending not to notice the soaked man standing in the entrance. His military coat hung in tatters, his left leg dragged behind him in slow pain, and his hands shook as he clutched a small paper bag against his chest, like it was the last thing he owned. Clara saw him hesitate, not searching for a seat, but for permission to exist in a place that clearly did not want him. She stepped toward him without a second thought. He moved to an empty booth but did not sit, gripping the backrest as though it kept him upright. And when Clara asked if he wanted something warm, he kept his eyes on the floor and whispered, "Just a cup of hot water, ma'am, and maybe a piece of bread that is headed for the trash." The request hit Clara like a memory because her grandfather had once described asking for the exact same thing on a freezing night in Busan during the Korean War. Something inside her tightened. She went to the kitchen and took a returned order of chicken and dumplings, plated it quickly, added buttered bread, poured fresh coffee, and walked back as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When he protested that he could not pay, she simply said, "It is already paid for, and the coffee is on me," and placed the tray in front of him. The man's eyes glistened as he whispered, "You remind me of my wife." She used to say, "Everyone deserves warmth, especially those who lived through too much cold." He ate slowly, every bite careful, every movement filled with pain he never voiced. And when he finished, he reached into his coat and placed a rusted dog tag into her hand. "Name is Eli Turner," he said. "If I do not make it through this winter, someone should know I existed." Then he shuffled back into the storm, leaving Clara frozen with the metal still warm from his palm. What she did not know was that Wayne Becker had seen everything from across the diner, his face twisting with anger as he marched toward her. And the moment he opened his mouth, the moment his voice thundered across the room, Clara's life began its fall, a fall that would shake the entire town before sunrise. Wayne Becker's voice hit the air like a slap, loud enough that even the customers pretending not to watch could not ignore it anymore. He marched toward Clara with heavy steps, his chest puffed out as if the presence of a hungry old man had personally insulted him. "What do you think you are doing?" he snapped, stabbing a finger toward the empty booth where Eli Turner had been sitting moments earlier. Clara kept her posture steady. "He asked for hot water," she said softly. "I gave him a returned plate that was going to be thrown out." Wayne's face turned red in seconds. "This is not a charity. This is not a shelter. This is a business," he growled. "You made me look weak in front of customers." Clara tried to speak, but he cut her off instantly. "You fed street trash for free in my diner. You do not get to make decisions here." The handful of customers stiffened but kept their eyes glued to their plates, clearly unwilling to get involved. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the small folded bills she had earned that day. "Take it from my tips," she said. "I am not stealing." Wayne slammed his palm on the counter, the sound cracking through the air. "No," he barked. "You embarrassed me. You ignored my rules. And now you are done." Clara froze. "You are fired," Wayne said, pointing at the door like it was a commandment carved into stone. "Right now, get out." The diner fell silent. A couple in the corner whispered to each other about bringing trouble inside, while a teenager quickly lowered his phone, afraid Wayne would notice. Not a single person defended her. Not a single voice rose to say she had done the right thing. Clara removed her apron slowly, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter the same way she did everything with dignity that nobody bothered to see. She walked out of the diner without looking back. Rain hit her instantly, soaking her hair and clothes until she could feel the weight dragging her down. But she did not stop or wipe her face or curse the sky. She simply walked, clutching her bag as if it were the only thing left holding her together. Then from the alley beside the diner, a familiar voice broke through the sound of the rain. "I saw what happened," Eli Turner said, limping toward her with effort. Clara shook her head, but he held up a hand. "I should not have let you pay a price for me," he whispered, "but you reminded me tonight that I am still human." He pressed his dog tag deeper into her hand. "Do not lose this. It carries more than my name." Before she could answer, he disappeared back into the storm. Clara walked home alone, soaked to her bones but too tired to even shiver. When she reached her tiny rented room, she peeled off her wet clothes, hung them on a chair, and sat silently on the bed while Smokey curled against her leg. She opened her phone. Her bank balance glowed on the screen like a warning. $42. Rent was due in 10 days. She had no job, no stability, and no backup plan. Yet she felt something strange, a small, stubborn ember of courage refusing to go out. She held Eli's dog tag in her hand, feeling the rough metal against her fingers, and wondered where he had served, what he had endured, and how a man who had sacrificed so much could be discarded so easily. She whispered to herself, "We will figure it out," though she had no idea how. She lay back and stared at the cracked ceiling, listening to the rain pounding the roof as if the world itself were falling apart. Exhaustion settled into her bones deeper than any shift at the diner had ever made her feel. The room was cold, the future was dark, and she felt the weight of everything pressing down on her bills, fear, shame, and the loneliness of being punished for doing something good. But outside, something else was happening. Something she could not see. Something she could never have imagined. Engines rolled quietly through the sleeping streets of Ridgefield. Headlights cut through the rain like ghostly signals. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement, because while Clara gripped a dog tag in her tiny room and wondered how she would survive the week, men in uniform were driving through the storm toward one destination, Billy's Diner, and by sunrise, the world she thought had rejected her would be standing at attention. Clara barely slept that night, drifting in and out while the storm outside hammered the roof like an unending warning, and every time she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Eli Turner's dog tag resting on her bedside table. By dawn, her body felt heavy, her thoughts scattered, and her future terrifyingly empty. But she forced herself up because giving up had never been an option for her. She walked to the bathroom sink, twisted the screaming faucet, and splashed cold water on her face as if it could wash away the reality that she had been fired for an act of kindness. Nothing washed away. She brewed instant coffee with the last packet she had, stared at the cracked cup in her hand, and tried not to think about what would happen when the landlord came knocking. Her phone buzzed suddenly, vibrating across the counter like something alive. A notification popped up, a video, posted by a teenager from the diner. The title hit her first. "Waitress fired for feeding homeless veteran." Her stomach dropped. She clicked it. The shaky footage showed Wayne Becker jabbing his finger at her, shouting that she made him look weak, calling the old man trash, and firing her in front of customers who pretended not to hear. Comments flooded the screen faster than she could read them. Some called her foolish, some called her a thief. Many said, "Rules are rules." Others mocked her for interfering. Very few defended her. Clara locked the phone and set it down, hands trembling. She tried to apply for jobs at 3 diners across town, but none of them gave her a chance. One manager glanced at her face, recognized her instantly, and gently slid the application back across the counter without a word. Another simply shook his head before she even introduced herself, telling her they could not risk attention or drama. Clara thanked them anyway, walked out quietly, and kept moving because stopping meant facing the weight of everything she had lost. Her chest ached, but she refused to cry in public. On her way back, she spotted a bus shelter she normally walked past without noticing. Today, she stopped. Beneath a thin sheet of plastic lay Eli Turner, curled on his side, clutching the same paper bag he had carried into the diner. His breath was shallow, his jacket soaked, but he still tried to sit up when he saw her. Clara knelt and placed a half sandwich beside him, the only food she had left from earlier. "Thank you for remembering me," she whispered. He nodded weakly. As she stood to leave, she did not notice the black military vehicle parked at the corner of the street. A man in uniform watched her closely, his expression unreadable, as he raised a phone to his ear. Clara walked away, unaware that someone had witnessed everything and that a quiet chain reaction had just begun moving in her favor. She had no idea that before the next sunrise, Ridgefield would wake to something it had never seen. And within hours, the entire town would be forced to choose which side of her story they truly believed. The rain finally stopped just before dawn, leaving Ridgefield wrapped in a thin layer of mist. But Clara didn't notice because she was too busy refreshing her phone, watching the comments spiral into something uglier by the minute. Strangers judged her, mocked her, accused her of pretending to be a hero, and insisted she had no right to give away food that wasn't hers. Former coworkers unfriended her one by one, and one even sent a message saying, "You always try to look righteous. Now look where that got you." Clara closed the app, feeling something inside her tighten like a knot pulled too far. She walked through town with her hood up, avoiding eye contact, trying to ignore the fact that people she had served for years now looked at her as if she were a problem they'd rather not think about. Every diner she stepped into offered the same polite rejection, the same nervous smile, the same excuse about avoiding unwanted attention. It didn't matter that she had done the right thing. Right and wrong didn't pay bills. And Ridgefield had never been kind to people who stepped out of line. By late afternoon, Clara found herself wandering without purpose, her shoes damp, her stomach empty, and her thoughts circling the same fear. She might not make rent this time. She walked past storefronts she knew by heart, but today they felt colder, the way a neighborhood feels different after you realize the people in it watched you fall but never reached out a hand. When she passed the alley behind the old market, she stopped again because she saw the one person who understood her pain without saying a word. Eli Turner was sitting upright now, leaning against the wall with the same paper bag in his lap, his breath still shallow but steadier than earlier. Clara approached him without hesitation, and he looked up at her with tired eyes that somehow still carried gratitude. She set a small package beside him, half a sandwich wrapped in newspaper, the last of her food, and said quietly, "You are not invisible. Not to me." Eli managed a faint smile. Clara didn't see the man watching her from across the street, the same officer who had been in the black military vehicle earlier. He observed her carefully, noticing every detail, the soaked shoes, the tired eyes, the gentle way she spoke to the broken veteran at her feet. When she walked away, the officer made another phone call, his tone firm and decisive, as though everything he had just witnessed confirmed what he already suspected. Ridgefield was about to get loud. Clara headed home with her hands in her pockets, unaware that her name was being spoken in places she had never imagined, in text messages between soldiers, in calls between veterans groups, and in a chain of communication that moved faster than any rumor the town had ever seen. Something was rising, something she had not called for, something she did not know existed, but it was coming. It was already on its way, and by sunrise, the people who had looked away from her yesterday would find themselves standing on a sidewalk they could not ignore, watching a spectacle they would never forget. The first rumble arrived at 6:45 in the morning, subtle at first, like distant thunder rolling across Ridgefield's silent streets, but it grew louder until even the sleepy shop owners felt the vibration through their floors. One by one, black military vehicles turned onto Main Street, moving in perfect formation, engines low and controlled, as if the entire convoy were holding its breath. They stopped directly in front of Billy's diner, lining the road with a precision the town had never seen, and the sight alone was enough to pull half the residents out of their homes. The first door opened, and a man stepped out wearing a sharply pressed United States Army uniform, his chest lined with medals that glinted in the early light. He stood tall, unmoving, scanning the diner with eyes that carried both authority and grief. Then more doors opened. Soldiers emerged from every vehicle, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, forming rows that stretched from one end of the block to the other. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, their boots planted firmly on the asphalt, as if they were guarding something sacred. Inside the diner, Wayne Becker was restocking napkins when the bell above the door jingled, and he looked up expecting a customer. Instead, he froze. The uniformed officer stood in the entrance, filling the doorway with a presence that made the entire diner shrink. "I would like to speak to the owner," the man said. Wayne stepped forward, suddenly pale, wiping his hands on a towel that trembled slightly. I am the owner." He reached into his coat and pulled out a laminated citation, laying it gently on the counter between them. "My father earned the Silver Star for carrying 12 wounded soldiers under enemy fire during our 2007 deployment in Iraq. He saved my life that day." The diner went silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Wayne stared at the citation, as if it were burning through the counter. "He refused treatment so others could be evacuated first," Colonel Turner said, voice tightening. "After my mother died, his post-traumatic stress disorder worsened. He disappeared, and we searched for him for months. He stepped closer. And now we find him here, fed, defended, and treated with dignity, not by this town, not by this diner, but by a waitress you fired." The words landed like a hammer. Outside, the formation of soldiers stood unmoving, watching through the windows, their presence an unspoken verdict. Wayne looked around desperately, hoping someone would defend him, someone would speak up, someone would soften the blow. No one moved. Not a single breath dared to interrupt the silence. And then the officer said, "Bring her here." His voice was not loud, but it carried across the room like an order the entire street was waiting to obey. Clara had no idea yet that the entire town was about to turn its gaze toward her. Clara was still in her tiny room above the auto garage, tying her hair back and preparing to search for another job, when a frantic knock rattled her door loud enough to make Smokey jump. She opened it to find a local reporter breathless on the stairs, a camera crew behind her, all speaking at once. "They are asking for you," the reporter said. "The soldiers. The entire block is shut down. Colonel Turner is calling for you right now." Clara blinked, unsure if she was still half dreaming. She followed them down the steps and onto the street, where a crowd had already formed, whispering, recording, and pointing toward Billy's diner. When she turned the corner, the soldiers standing in formation parted just enough to let her through, their faces solemn, their posture rigid. Then, as she walked between them, every soldier raised a hand to their forehead in a unified salute that froze her in place. Clara had never been honored for anything in her life, and now 200 soldiers stood saluting her as if she were someone extraordinary. Colonel Turner stepped forward with a small black case in his hands. He opened it and revealed the Silver Star, polished and whole again. "My father wanted you to have this," he said. Clara shook her head immediately. "I cannot accept that," she whispered. "It is not mine." The colonel placed it in her palm anyway. "It is now. You honored him when others did not. You saw him when others refused to look. And because of you, he is not lost anymore." Wayne Becker staggered in the doorway of his diner, pale and speechless, as the crowd outside grew larger. People recorded every second, broadcasting his humiliation to the world the same way he had once shouted Clara's. Within hours, the diner's suppliers canceled their contracts, the staff resigned, and veterans groups filled the sidewalk demanding accountability. Wayne disappeared from town within days, leaving behind an empty building with a sun-bleached for lease sign in the window. Clara did not celebrate his downfall. She did not post online. She did not give interviews. She simply stepped back, clutching the Silver Star in her hand, overwhelmed not by attention but by the weight of everything that had happened. She had no job, no plan, and no idea what would come next. But people were watching her now, not with judgment, but with respect. And the moment she turned to leave, another door opened for her. One she never expected. One that would change her life in a quieter, but far more permanent way. The offer came from a veteran-founded nonprofit that had watched the entire event unfold. And within a week they gave Clara a full-time position, managing a new community kitchen in an old warehouse across town. She accepted quietly, not because she wanted recognition, but because helping people felt like the only thing she had left that made sense. The warehouse, once filled with broken vending machines and forgotten junk, was soon transformed into a warm space filled with the smell of chili, cornbread, and fresh coffee. Volunteers arrived daily, former soldiers, single mothers, retired nurses, and teenagers who wanted to do something good. Clara worked nonstop, organizing meals, greeting newcomers, and making sure no one felt invisible the way Eli Turner had been made to feel. Smokey became the unofficial mascot, perched on a windowsill like a tiny, one-eyed guardian watching over the kitchen. The most unforgettable moment came one afternoon when a small boy walked in clutching a neatly folded dollar bill and a homemade cookie wrapped in wax paper. "I saw you in the video," he said. "My grandpa was a soldier too. I want to help someone like he did." Clara knelt down and nearly cried, placing her hand over her heart as 200 soldiers had done for her days earlier. Meanwhile, Eli Turner was moved into a nearby Veterans Affairs housing unit, where he received regular medical care, clean clothes, and a warm bed for the first time in years. His son visited often, sometimes bringing younger soldiers who wanted to hear his stories not just about war overseas, but about the quiet battles fought daily by people who slipped through society's cracks. Clara visited him too whenever she could, sitting quietly beside him, not needing many words because gratitude doesn't need conversations to be heard. At night, Clara kept Eli's dog tag and the silver star in a small wooden box next to her bed, touching them gently before sleeping, as if grounding herself in the reminder that one act of compassion had reshaped everything around her. The town eventually moved on, social media found new outrage, and the video scrolled downward into yesterday's feed, but those who had seen the truth carried it with them. They remembered the waitress who stood up when it mattered, the veteran who had been forgotten until someone noticed, and the moment Ridgefield learned that dignity is not a luxury, it is a responsibility. And in the quiet closing of each day, as Clara locked the doors of the community kitchen and listened to the last echoes fade, she finally understood what her grandfather had meant all those years ago. Honor is not loud. It lives in the small things, in the quiet choices, and in the courage to do what is right when no one else will. And this time, Clara was no longer invisible. She had become the kind of person whose quiet strength could change an entire town without ever raising her voice.